All right, next we're going to talk about default values. As we saw when I describe any of our tables so far, describe cats, cats2, we have this default column here that describes the default values present for a column. Kind of a confusing sentence, but essentially there is no default value for name or age. Same thing with cats2, there's no default value. But we can change that. When we create a table, we can specify a default value using this syntax. Default, and then immediately after, separated by a space, whatever the default value is that we want to set. Now, we can alter a table as well to do this after the fact, but we haven't covered that yet. So once again, we're going to make a new table. This time, cats3. It's going to get a little confusing, cats2, cats3, but we've only got one or two more. So let's do cats3. And I'm going to just keep it simple. Again, name, varchar. We'll have a default of unnamed or no name or unknown, whatever it would make sense to set up as a default value for a cat. Let's say we're running a shelter and we bring in cats off the street. They don't have microchips or collars. We don't know their name. We probably still assign them some name. I think the way shelters usually do it is they actually have a list of different random names they can pick from instead of naming every cat that comes in, John Doe or something. But it doesn't matter. That's not the point of this course. But let's do a create table, cats3, and we'll have name, which again will be varchar. In the slides I did 100. It doesn't really matter. We're going to have short cat names, so I'll do 50. And then default, let's go with mystery. Okay. And then age is an int. We don't have to provide a default value if we don't want to, but in this case, just to demonstrate it, I will. Age, int, the default value will be 99, just like the slide. All right. Close my paren, semicolon, and we're done. So now what I can do is insert into cats3. Let's say I only provide an age because this cat that we just picked up off the street, this poor, wet, sad cat, we don't know its name. So we can estimate its age, I guess. We'll say its age is 2. If we look at cats3, select star from cats3, we'll see that name has been set to mystery. So that default value kicked in. In fact, I could insert a cat that has nothing when we created, no values present, but because we have those default values present, we end up with mystery and 99. Now it's kind of confusing to have all these cats called mystery, and why on earth would the default age be 99? It doesn't matter. Stop asking questions. So that's how we set up a default value, at least when we create a table. That's how we set up a default value. Following the name of the column, we then specify the data type, and then add-ons like not null, or in this case, default, followed by the default value. Now something that you might be wondering is, do we need to specify not null and default? Because by providing a default value, doesn't that mean that there's no way for this value to be null, right? If I inserted this empty cat, as we saw right here, and we select star again from cats3, we don't end up with null values because we have default values. However, that doesn't stop me from changing this to be null or changing this to be null. Just setting a default value is not the same as saying this can never be null. So they can work in tandem. Not null just says this can never be empty. This particular column, this value can't be empty. And default is simply saying if there is no value specified, it should default to this value. But if we had default without not null, then I could easily set a value to be null manually. So I can do that right here. I'll show you. I can insert the value null directly into a table. So insert into cats3. Let's say name and age. Values will be null and null. So it's a special MySQL value. And then I'll select all my cats. And what do we see? Null and null. So that tells us that a default value is not going to protect us in a situation like that if I manually set something to null, which is not always a bad thing. Sometimes we want to allow null. Imagine we're setting up a phone book or a contact app or something where users have to have or every row in the users table has a name, an email, a cell phone, and maybe a home phone number, maybe a fax number. But not everybody has those. So maybe we make cell phone a requirement or home phone a requirement, but we can make the others nullable. They don't have to be present. So we could say your fax number can be null. If you don't have a fax machine, I don't have one, we would allow that to be null. So null is not a bad thing, but it can be a bad thing if you aren't expecting it or you don't want to allow it. But all you have to do to make sure that a value is not nullable and has a default value if it's not present is to use both, not null followed by default. So to save time, I'll just copy and paste this so that you don't have to watch me type the whole thing. I'll paste it in there. And now if I were to try to insert into cats4 where I manually write null as my two values, I'll get an error. It says name cannot be null. And it would have said age cannot be null, but it stopped at that first error. So it didn't insert anything. But if I instead did this, insert into cats4, empty, empty, we will get those default values. So I know this is kind of boring. I hope I was at least clear here so you understand the difference. Cats4, we have unnamed and 99. Those were the default values. And if I go do a describe cats4, not only do we see that it's not nullable, name and age, neither of which are nullable, we also see the default values listed. So if you ever forget what the default value is, you can describe your table and MySQL will show you right there. Okay, I hope you're hanging in there.